Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, people are mad at our pronunciation again.
Oh, shit. What did we do now?
So this one's on me. Hand up.
Could have been
my
me.
fault.
Could have been me, man.
Last week, we were talking about German politics, and I was just having too much fun saying the name of their parliament, the Bundestag. You can't have fun with it. You can't say Bundestag like I wanted to say.
Bundestag.
You have a bunch of Germans in your mentions yelling at you if you have that SH in there. It's tough.
That's a good call out.
Yeah.
Shit. I mean, we're trying too hard.
I'm just trying to have a good time.
I mean, this is the rare time where actually we thought we were trying hard to get it right, and we got it wrong, huh?
Listen, I apologize. Again, we issued a blanket apology for our pronunciation several months ago. I refer you all to that. But in the future, I will say that I don't want angry Germans coming at me in my mentions, sort of as a general matter. So here we are. Blanket apology. Ben, we have a lot to cover today, literally. So there's this new massive leak of financial information that details how the rich and the powerful hide their money and avoid taxes. There are so many stories about that from this dump of documents that I wasn't even close to capable of reading all of them, but we're going to dig into what we can. We're going to talk about Facebook and how they, kind of went out of commission for a few hours yesterday and the implications globally. Talk about CIA sources, a couple stories out of France, some China news, Ethiopia, why Biden's immigration policy led to another resignation in the State Department, and then Shakira is going to make her debut on Pod Save the World. So stick around for that.
Hopefully not the last time.
Ben, want to start with these Pandora papers? This feels like
Let's
the biggest story out there.
Let's go.
So this is like an area you've been following forever. So it's this mega leak of financial information dropped over the weekend. It's called the Pandora Papers. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists got their hands on millions of financial records, emails, contracts, other records that detail like trusts and other ways super rich people hide money from taxes or cops or lawsuits or whatever. According to the Washington Post, who are one of 150 news outlets involved in this project. That's how big this is. The information dump includes records from 14 separate financial services entities, and the account owners that are detailed in this document dump include 130 billionaires and more than 330 public officials from more than 90 countries. So this is a literally global story. Some of the big names in the early reporting include Vladimir Putin, King Abdullah of Jordan, the president or prime minister of the Dominican Republic, the Ivory Coast, the Czech Republic, Montenegro, Kenya, Ecuador, the UAE, Chile, and Ukraine. It remains to be seen if there are going to be big political fallout from many of the leaders mentioned, but the story's just starting. Then there was a story in the Post that was sort of like the overall take about what they had and how they were going to report on it. And this sentence in it was maybe the most depressing thing I read, period, which was, quote, financial experts said the uber rich in the United States tend to pay such low tax rates that they have less incentive to seek offshore havens. That was explaining why there aren't bold named, American billionaires in the piece. Like Elon Musk isn't in there because he could just open
Congress does it for him.
Yeah, he could just do it. Yeah, open a trust in South Dakota or something. So anyway, it seems like we're going to be reading about this stuff for a long time. You have been following this sort of kleptocracy piece of this, how it impacts U.S. foreign policy, how it screws with democracies. Any big takeaways so far from what you read?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of big takeaways. I mean, the first is the other depressing part, Tommy, is the degree to which the kind of American-made financial system globally facilitates this. The capacity to have tax havens, anonymous shell companies, money kind of hidden in real estate. We wired this whole global financial system to facilitate this kind of activity. And this is something I really kind of confronted in my book when I was looking at the ways in which the United States contributes to authoritarianism globally. This is one of the big ways, in the sense that, if you look at this, some of these people are hiding money in anonymous shell companies in the U.S. and real estate interests here. There was a positive step taken in late 2020 in response to a lot of activism to say that a certain kind of beneficial ownership, that means you can have an anonymous LLC, limited liability corporation. The ability to do that anonymously was removed by Congress. So there are going to be more transparency tools going forward. But I think a first takeaway is to realize how much we need to be reforming and pulling the thread on how to make the global financial system more transparent, so we at least know whose money's moving around, and people can track what their leaders or what their titans of industry or titans of kleptocracy are doing. There's another piece insofar as some of this transaction becomes illicit or is meant to evade laws or regulations. We don't put a lot of resources into trying to crack down on this kind of corruption. It's actually another thing you can kind of pin on 9/11 in the sense that an extraordinary amount of governmental resources from Treasury, from the IRS, went into cracking down on terrorist financing, and that's a choice that took resources away from how do you cut down on money laundering and efforts to evade government regulations or national laws. So the big picture here, I think, is the idea that if we want to crack down on the capacity for really corrupt and bad actors to be hiding money and stashing in different places and stealing from their own people and putting it somewhere else, we need to be making continued reforms to bring greater transparency and enforcement to this kind of system of international finance.
Yeah, man, there's just so many pieces of this thing. I mean, like, there's ones, like, in case you think this is, like, not a big deal, oh, people are just avoiding taxes. Like, no, there's a story about how criminals and mobsters and, like, just the worst people on the planet use these accounts to make, like, Belize, for example, to hide from accountability. There's stories in here. There's one story about Putin's mistress having an estimated net worth of $100 million, including this, like, luxury apartment in Monte Carlo. There's stories about U.S. sanctions and their impact on Russian oligarchs. And then, to the point you made at the start, Ben, I mean, we knock, Cayman Islands tax codes in the way you'll have, like, buildings with 50,000, addresses in the same building incorporated in the same place. I mean, part of this reporting out of this piece is that South Dakota has become a massive tax and trust shelter, like, on the same order of some of the things you've seen offshore. I mean, like, we're onshoring some of these worst practices.
I'm going to give a shout out to my mom right now. I'm in New York City, my parents' apartment, and they have built a couple of buildings. One's being constructed and one's already built right across the street from my parents. And they basically tore down kind of old apartment buildings, and they're putting up these really glitzy new buildings that are taller than my parents' apartment, but there are only like 10 apartments there because God knows how much these things cost. And like nobody lives in the buildings, right? Why is that interesting? It's interesting because part of what a lot of investigations revealed in New York City, for instance, is a lot of real estate, luxury real estate in the United States, is not people buying places to live. It's people from places like Russia, like putting money into real estate in the United States, often through anonymous, anonymous shell companies, so that they can hide money here or they can launder money into real estate here. I mean, so much of our system just facilitates this kind of stuff, and it's going to require a lot of effort to turn that around. Another quick piece on this, you mentioned Putin, and you talked about it being early, because I think some people might say, well, look, these big reports come out and nothing really changes, and so do they even matter? There's usually a tail to these things. So we talked about WikiLeaks last week. Some of those cables, it took a year or two, but ultimately, if they reveal corruption, there are these kind of mini scandals that grow and grow and grow inside of countries. And the more people learn about this kind of behavior and this kind of corruption, the greater vulnerability there are for political leaders, whether it's Putin, in the report, there are allegations of kind of what he was doing for a mistress and, a potential child that people don't know about. And King Abdullah, obviously, it was huge amounts of money. He's moving around in different places. I would be cautious in saying, there's no, just because the world didn't change in a week doesn't mean these things matter. These things accumulate over time. And I think the impression of certain leaders being corrupt, certain governments being corrupt is building. And that does create internal pressures over time. And I think the exposure of this kind of corruption should be an objective in and of itself, because that's part of how we have to combat autocracy.
Yeah, the Panama Papers, I think, toppled a couple governments. Ben, when you gave your mom a shout out, I was imagining her like sleuthing through this new building, like Only Murders in the Building. Have you seen this show on Hulu, like chasing down some oligarch, on the 6th floor?
Somehow my mom gets good information about like how many people like are actually in these apartment buildings and how many apartments are being, there's definitely a wire that she's plugged into here.
I like that.
I don't know where she gets her info, but it's good info, I think.
This international consortium of journalists should call her and have her publish things. Let's turn to.
I think there are two pieces to this, right? There's autocracy and there's antitrust, and they're somewhat related. But to take the autocracy first, and that's what this whistleblower, I think, I take her comments as validating of the idea that Facebook just doesn't give a shit about anything other than profit. And so the fact that their algorithms and their product is having an impact on foreign countries that is incredibly corrosive to democracy, that as long as Facebook makes a buck, they don't really care what the consequences are. Look, that was, there's always a part of me that when this happens and you see kind of headlines, you're like, this is obvious. We've all been talking about this for years, but that doesn't mean it's not useful that the whistleblower comes forward, because a whistleblower, even if they're confirming kind of what you already suspect to be true, that triggers congressional hearings and that can add to the momentum for the necessary regulation. If Facebook will not protect public health and safety in the United States and around the world through its platform, that's when governments have to regulate things. And here they'd have to regulate the algorithm, and they'd have to introduce some sense of liability for Facebook for the poison, literally, that it's spreading online. So good for this whistleblower. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Tommy, and you can second if you want to. I'd encourage other Facebook employees to come forward and be a part of this debate. Like, if you are part of an enterprise that you feel like internally you're not getting a reaction, there are times when airing these concerns publicly can make a positive difference. Obviously, we are on the other end of that in government, so I just want to own that, obviously. So there's always tension here, which I understand. But I think this is obviously advanced the debate. On the WhatsApp point, it really jumped out to me yesterday, Tommy, because almost everybody I communicate with internationally, including like the types of activists we hear on the show, like they live on WhatsApp.
Right.
And during the Afghan evacuation, for instance, all those efforts, including efforts by U.S. veterans and NGOs to get people out, those were all WhatsApp groups. Yep. And part of me was thinking, like, what would have happened if this outage happened in the middle of the Afghan evacuation? It would have literally, prevented the saving of lives. And this gets to the antitrust point of, why does Facebook own? They didn't create WhatsApp. They didn't create Instagram. They bought them. They were so big that they just kind of consumed them like an ever-growing organism. And because what do they want? They want more data that services their profit model. And I don't think it makes sense for like a social network to have to be also the dominant power in instant messaging and how people speak on the phone, which is what WhatsApp is obviously used for all those things. So Elizabeth Warren has been at the forefront of this, but I mean, we need to be looking at why Facebook has been able to grow in so many areas to achieve this kind of dominance of data accumulation, essentially. That's in the same way that you need public safety regulated by the government, you need antitrust laws enforced, and the spirit of antitrust laws enforced. And Facebook clearly, as we learned in the outage, like their tentacles just feel far too wide for any one company.
Yeah, and look, a lot of those mergers and acquisitions happened during the Obama years, and I think we should look back on those, decide whether they're mistakes, decide whether the law was there to block them, and then update the laws to fit the reality.
When I go out and talk about my book, some of these people ask me, like, what was the biggest mistakes of the Obama administration? And I don't know what they expect me to say, but I often say, like, the falling behind the curve on the impact of the scale of big tech and the lack of regulation of social media, which wasn't really debated at the time. Like, I don't remember there being much pressure to do it. So I understand why the Obama administration, we weren't ahead of the curve on this, but clearly it's been way too long, and
yep.
and now's a chance for the Biden team, I think, to try to put more attention on this, at least from what can be done on the executive branch level or through DOJ. Yeah.
Maybe put some people under 50 at some of these hearings too. That'd be good. Ben, can I read you an alarming New York Times lead?
Yeah.
Top American counterintelligence officials warned every CIA station and base around the world last week about troubling numbers of informants recruited from other countries to spy for the United States being captured or killed. That was the lead all of this report. So apparently a cable went out, a top secret cable went out from the CIA to, I guess, all the frontline stations. And it was referencing the fact that intelligence services in places like Russia, China, Iran, and Pakistan have been really good at hunting down CIA sources. In some cases, they've been killing them or arresting them or turning them into double agents. The potential reasons why cited in this report were maybe sloppy work by the CIA, not prioritizing the security and vetting of sources well enough, as well as the impact of new technology that just makes it easier for, these counter intel services abroad to track CIA officers or sources in their countries. It was a weird story. There's been some previous reporting about how China, for example, was able to roll up all of the CIA sources that were in the country. I think what happened is they figured out how the U.S. was communicating with those sources, the so-called covert communications. So weird story. Here's the thing I was wondering after reading this, Ben. Do you think this memo was leaked to the New York Times on purpose to how does this get out? How does a top secret cable about the need to button things up when it comes to counterintelligence make its way to the New York Times a week later? That's really weird to me.
Everything about this is really weird and really obviously concerning. If the CIA, because look, if this is true, right, then their capacity to access any human intelligence, right, to have sources and people that work with them and provide them information is pretty devastatingly compromised, right? So in the first instance, whatever happened, whether it's some compromise in communications, whether it's a hack that could be exploited, whether there's a mole, in the old-fashioned parlance, it's not good for the CIA. And the leak itself, if someone took the step of putting this in the public domain, are they trying to warn people?
I know. What's happening here?
And how did the CIA not push it? So I put it to reverse question you, Tommy. You would have been at the NSC in a story like this that's going to run. The Times would normally call and say to the White House, hey, we're going to run this. And presumably you might try to stop it from running, or you might I don't know. You're right. The fact that this appears in the paper, is unusual.
Yeah, it was very odd. There was sort of one little redaction you could see in there, which is it said in the report that I think the cable itself detailed the exact number of sources or informants who had been captured or killed or otherwise disappeared, and that was not reflected in the story. So that was sort of one little operational security thing you could imagine someone asking not to be reported. But I don't know. The whole thing was just really weird. Maybe interesting sort of related topic. I also saw that Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is putting forward legislation as part of the Intel Community's funding bill that will include restrictions and reporting requirements that will make it harder for former U.S. spies to work as contractors for foreign governments. Some of those restrictions include a 30-month waiting period for some individuals before you can work for the U.S. and then go work for some private company that's doing work abroad. This law was in part inspired by a 2019 Reuters investigation that exposed basically an American-led spy-for-hire operation in the United Arab Emirates, a bunch of hackers over there. So, again, another report where I read this and I thought, how the fuck was this allowed in the first place? How was the U.S. training a bunch of spies and then all of a sudden they wind up in the UAE, hacking, dissidents or journalists or maybe American officials?
This is a huge story, and God, I love this topic list today, as dark as it is, because this is the stuff I've been really interested in, because it all connects back to this autocracy question. I mean, you've seen this explosion of private intelligence, which we've talked about a lot in the last decade, but I mean, to shorthand it for people, if you're working in the U.S. government and you're drawing a U.S. government salary, right, and you're a CIA operative, and then you're aware that if you take your skill set and you take it for a spin to a place like the Gulf, imagine how much more you'll get paid by the Emirates or the Saudis. Or if you go to one of these really hardcore mercenary type outfits, you could end up working for kind of some murky interest that connects back to the Russian government or the Chinese government. There's some weird stuff in Africa, right, around how you're securing natural resources and so this whole private intelligence thing is a huge issue. And yeah, I mean, if people are entrusted with the secrets of the U.S. government and they're taught the kind of skills that we provide to people. The idea that you just kind of take that on the open market, you can see the vulnerabilities here. And look, I mean, this is an opaque world, and I don't know the answer to any of this because I haven't been in government in 5 years. But the combination of like the Havana syndrome stuff and these leaks and that Time story you referenced, like it seems like there's some pretty significant, really kind of almost structural challenges for American intelligence these days.
Yeah, and it's just worth noting that there was then after we talked about the Havana syndrome stories last week, I think it was, there was a report in BuzzFeed that suggests that another set of experts think that most of the challenges are psychosomatic, that arise from stress, that some of the recordings that have been made of what this, the what was considered like a directed energy device we're making were actually some form of crickets. I don't say that because I know that to be true or to belittle anyone who feels like they're suffering from this. It's just there's a range of opinions on this. But yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, it sounds like. The intelligence community is uncertain as to why people feel like they're being hurt, where the hell their employees are going once they leave the services, and how the hell all their sources are getting rolled up abroad. None of that seems very good.
Well, and look, this is a place for congressional oversight in general. And I should point out, by the way, that the first 2 years of the Trump administration, I remember when my ass was hauled in front of the House Intelligence Committee chaired by Devin Nunes with Staff Director Kash Patel. I remember thinking at the time, what are they not doing in terms of oversight? Like,
for sure.
They're spending every second of their leadership of that committee, which is the only real source of oversight of the intelligence community, trying to validate, conspiracy theories that aren't true on behalf of Donald Trump. We've obviously had different leadership under Adam Schiff. And I do think that we may be at a moment in this legislation you reference is, I think, a positive step where, the Congress might need to, across the board, be looking at these issues. Like what are we putting out and what do we understand about the Havana syndrome? How are we addressing this issue of private intelligence? Why have there been so many leaks or apparent vulnerabilities in our intelligence networks? It does feel like periodically, you need to take a step back and look across the whole enterprise. And this feels like a time where that might make a lot of sense to do.
Yeah, that might be good. Okay, a couple pieces of news out of France. The first is fucking awful, and I don't know what else to say about it. So an independent commission set up by Catholic bishops in France found that 216,000 victims under the age of 18 were sexually abused by priests or other clerics in the French Catholic Church since 1950. Truly horrific. Throw those fuckers in jail. That is a dark, dark, broken institution, and I'm going to stop talking before I say something that will offend people, but oh my God.
In country after country, too, by the way. Like, we had our reckoning here. Ireland had a reckoning recently. It's just everywhere that there's an investigation into this, the numbers and outcome is worse than anybody possibly imagined.
Staggering.
And the Vatican just has not done nearly enough. Francis has tried to do a bunch of stuff. He's met with some resistance at times, but holding these people accountable and cleaning up that the just awful moral morass, evil behavior. I'm going to stop talking too because it's just the most disgusting thing imaginable.
It's the crimes, it's the cover-ups, for the second and the third time, like shifting people around. It's just awful. Okay, so we're very pissed about that. Sarkozy. So last week was a tough one for former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who was sentenced to a year of house arrest for campaign finance violations during his 2012 re-election campaign. So Ben, the reason this story jumped out at me was really less about like the Sarko specific facts, so there'll be some fun ones later, but this. France has spending limits for campaigns to ensure fairness. Remember back in the day when we used to think those were good ideas? So in 2012, the limit was $19.7 million for the first round of elections and then $6.7 million for like the second round, the runoff. So, we're talking like $27 million for the whole thing. That's like a decent fundraising quarter for like Barack Obama in 2008 in the presidential campaign, let alone what people were raising throughout the duration of an entire campaign. And then, so Sarkozy apparently spent double that limit. And then here's the other interesting part. So in the past, I guess Sarkozy has also been accused of tricking the heiress to the L'Oreal cosmetics empire into giving him money. I think we talked about this previously.
Yeah.
Those charges were dropped He's also accused of receiving illegal campaign financing from Muammar Gaddafi's government. That investigation is ongoing. So Sarko's appealing the campaign finance conviction. Amazingly, he's still seen as like a relatively big player in French politics, so people still want his endorsement and stuff. But man, 19.7 million for the first round, 6.7 for the runoff. That's just incredible.
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is still a player in our politics, and that guy tried to overthrow the U.S.
point.
government. So glass house over here.
Big time glass house.
But yeah, like you're right. I mean, like we spend billions of dollars on presidential campaigns. This is a reminder that our system is insane and corrupt.
So
I mean,
stupid.
like you can have limits, and those limits can be enforced, and people can face consequences if they break them. And so I take that away, and also the Sarkozy, the Gaddafi stuff, right, which has always been kind of a part of this big ball of corruption shadowing Sarkozy. Again, what's worth pointing out is that Sarkozy was at the forefront, the absolute forefront of the decision to intervene in Libya. You know, he was pushing for it more than any leader. And it does make you kind of wonder, you know, about like what was he trying to atone for something there? Or did you know, like what was going on with that? I mean, because you know, he let's just say he swung pretty far on the Gaddafi issue pretty fast, you know.
Yes, very, very dark element to that whole decision. So last thing, so Ben, Tony Blinken, our friend, Secretary of State, he's in France right now. Listeners probably remember that France is angry at the U.S. because the U.S. signed a security deal with the U.K. and Australia that led to the cancellation of a French contract to sell $66 billion worth of submarines to the Australians. So French lost a lot of money on this deal. So Tony visited with the French foreign minister today. I guess they walked around the French equivalent of the State Department for about an hour. They did like a walk and talk instead of a formal meeting. Ben, here's how the New York Times described this stroll. They compared it to Reagan's walk in the woods with Gorbachev in 1985 to reset U.S.-Soviet relations, and to Jimmy Carter's walks with foreign leaders at Camp David during the Camp David Accords. Do you think we've reached peak hyperbole about this subject matter?
I don't know what the equivalent is to like the red hen civility alert, you know, but. Yeah,
the
like
height of the Cold War.
Yeah. I mean,
Reagan
this
walking around the
this is
Gorbachev.
insane. Like, as someone who worked, you know, with the press, like I did, like this desire to constantly kind of attach yourself to more iconic events that happened in the past, you know, is one of the weirdest pathologies of the American media. So, I mean, this is where it's like, you know, anything that, you know, if Obama like farted, you know, it'd be like, is this his Katrina? You know, like, because Katrina was a really big event. And maybe if I call this little thing that happened Katrina, like people, like
we had a lot of Katrinas.
What, like Tony's walking around trying to make the French foreign ministry like be a little less pissed at us by kind of, you know, smiling, and, you know, Tony speaks elegant French, by the way.
And these guys are friends. They've known each other for years, Tony and the French foreign
What
minister.
the hell? Maybe he just took a walk with the guy. And yeah, maybe he's trying to like show that like, hey, we really respect the work the French foreign ministry does. That doesn't mean it's like Reagan and Gorbachev deciding about nuclear disarmament, you know, or fucking Camp David Accords here, guys. Like, let's just get some. The AUKUS story was like an exciting 2-day narrative thing in D.C. And there was like an exciting dust-up where the ambassador got recalled. But like, let's just chill out here a little bit, guys. You know?
Yeah, I too want the U.S. and France to have close relations. I want this breach repaired. The press is just that is just such an absurd comparison. Like, come on, let's move on.
Okay.
Ben, piece of China news. This is another weird like story where like I couldn't really tell if this was a big deal or not, and I wanted to see what you thought. So first, Catherine Tai, the U.S. trade representative, gave a speech about U.S.-China trade relations. That's one item. Second, Taiwan keeps sounding the alarm because the Chinese are flying fighter jets into their air defense zone. So here's a question. Like, you hear about these air incursions a lot into the Taiwanese air defense zone. I guess what's new is that the Chinese are sending more and more of them at a time. So there'll be like 20 fighters, 30 fighters, right? It'll be more and more planes, which, you know, is alarming, understandably. So that's maybe the new part. The speech, I don't know. You hear a lot of like American officials giving these speeches saying it's time to get tough with the Chinese government about trade. Did anything jump out at you about the speech or anything about these air incursions seem particularly new or worrisome?
I mean, I think the speech kind of confirmed what we've been able to surmise thus far, which is that the tariffs that Trump put in place and some of the punitive measures that Trump put in place are not going to be rolled back. She said in some cases there'll be like exceptions, more carved out exceptions where people don't have to pay the tariffs, but that what the Biden team is doing is not dismantling Trump's trade war and replacing it with something else. It's keeping a lot of that infrastructure in place, but aiming to build it out and multilateralize it and figure out joint positions with allies. So to me, it just kind of reconfirmed that they are in the process of building a kind of long-term series of tools that are meant to combat everything from Chinese subsidies to favored industries and unfair practices and theft of intellectual property and obviously more focused on human rights than Trump did, and doing it in a variety of ways. But a lot of the details kind of remain to be filled in the future. I think on the air defense issues in Taiwan, look, what the Chinese try to do is this is what they've done in the South China Sea. They're supposed to recognize certain kind of international norms, and they're supposed to see certain areas as contested or and not do certain things. But in the South China Sea, they started building militarized rocks, and with airstrips on them, and just kind of trying to create a new status quo. And I think in Taiwan, what they're trying to do is kind of wear people down and wear the Taiwanese down and wear us down. Hey, we just don't acknowledge that we can't just fly our fighter jets through here. And I think it's worrisome, not that they're going to invade Taiwan. It's worrisome in that they have this strategy of kind of continuing to blur the lines of any sense of sovereignty for the Taiwanese or any sense of an agreed upon or negotiated way of approaching these issues. I think that it raises the bar, what we would do in the Obama administration to show that the South China Sea wasn't just like a Chinese body of water, because it kind of snaked around the coastlines of a bunch of other countries, and any international process would not say that whole body of waters is theirs. Is we would do naval exercises ourselves on behalf of the idea that this freedom of navigation, these are international waters and we can come through here too. So I think the Biden team may be looking for ways to push back and to demonstrate that we don't accept a new reality that China is trying to create. I do think this whole space is worth watching. I saw an announcement today that Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is going to meet in the coming days with the top Chinese diplomat. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden are both going to be at the G20 summit, which is in a few weeks, presumably both going to be in Glasgow. They have not interacted yet since Biden became president.
Oh, that'll be a hoot.
Yeah, so I think, on all these fronts, we may know a lot more about at least the mood music that the U.S. and China want to establish, because usually those leaders meetings, you come out and, okay, this is where things stand on Taiwan, this is where things stand on trade, this is where things stand on climate change across the board. And so this is going to be a very busy few weeks for figuring out just how tense the relationship is going to be going forward with China.
The first round of meetings with Tony and Jake Sullivan. And
those went great. Yeah.
The Chinese were basically them just screaming at each other. So, that didn't seem very fun. So last week, Ethiopia said it was kicking 7 United Nations officials out of the country for, quote, meddling in the internal affairs of the country. So this came from an Associated Press report. So the context here, as we've talked about before, is that there's this ongoing civil war in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government has been attacking fighters and leaders in the northern Tigray region, and currently they are blocking shipments of food, fuel, and medical supplies to that region, which is starving kids. There's just no other way to describe it. The people are going to die because of this blockade. So shortly before this announcement, a top UN official criticized what was happening, criticized the blockade, and called it a stain on our conscience. I assume that it's something to do with these UN staffers getting later kicked out. So, Ben, I'm just going to end this section less with a question than with a request to our listeners. I imagine some of you work in the State Department. I imagine some of you work in Congress. We would love to see more statements, more letters, more calls for sanctions, more calls for anything to actually happen to stop what the fuck's going on, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. There was a couple of limited announcements from the Biden team setting up potential sanctions, but you have a famine potentially happening as we speak, and it just feels like no one's doing anything or talking about it.
Samantha Power's been very vocal about this, so I think she's been out in the lead on this. I saw Tony put something out on it. But I mean, look, I think we've talked about this a lot. Like the scale of the humanitarian crisis just keeps growing. And look, I would add to your call to international actors, foreign governments. Like this is something that requires, I think, a much more broad and vocal international response. It's not to say that people aren't working hard on it; they are.
Yeah.
But it's just time to just keep turning the decibel level up, because clearly this is continuing to careen in the wrong direction.
Yeah, look, Sam over USAID, like they want to be able to deliver food and do their job and save people's lives, and that's great. I do think there needs to be just like a more of a punitive element. And I think one thing we learned from our conversation with Nima at CNN and many others, that the Ethiopian government cares a lot about what the U.S. media writes about it, what people here think about it and say about it. And so if members of Congress would just start blasting away and just describing what's happening, I think it would actually matter. It's not happening enough, at least. Two other things. So a top State Department advisor, legal scholar, has resigned from the State Department and sent an exit memo criticizing President Biden's immigration policy, talking about a guy named Harold Koh, who is really a big name, kind of a luminary in legal circles. He was the State Department's legal advisor from 2009 to 2013 under Obama. Ben and I both know him well. Yeah. He's like a brilliant, good guy. He criticized Biden's use of Title 42 in this memo. That's the public health authority that was first used by Trump and now the Biden administration to expel individuals in the name of preventing the spread of COVID. Koh specifically cited the administration's decision to fly thousands of migrants from Texas to Haiti under Title 42, despite the fact that many of them are fleeing violence, fleeing persecution, fleeing torture, so they were just not given any chance at asylum. The Biden administration's use of Title 42 authority has also been challenged in court. So this is the second State Department aide to resign over the treatment of Haitian refugees. The first was the special envoy to Haiti. But I suspect that this won't be the last as long as this law is kept in place. So just something worth watching. He's
a big figure in international legal and in humanitarian circles. So, when Harold Koh does something like that, it gets a lot of attention. He also made some constructive suggestions too. He wasn't just protesting. He said
it's like a 6-page memo, of course.
Yeah, it's a memo, and I may not get them all in, but he suggested that more effort could be done to determine whether some of these people have family in the United States. That there, more effort need to be put into adjudicating, obviously, asylum claims, raising questions about whether the deportations should be back to Haiti, because in some cases these people have been outside of Haiti for years and have been in Chile and other countries, and so what is the is it the right thing to deport people back to some place that is dangerous that they haven't even been for a while? So it raised a bunch of questions and also raised some more humane ways of dealing with this issue. I saw the Biden team essentially kind of revert to the point that this is a CDC type decision, that so long as there is this kind of medical emergency, that they have to follow kind of the CDC determination before they can move beyond using this measure. But look, I mean, I think in some circumstances, right, you have to take into account the extreme circumstance of what's going on in Haiti, all the things that recently happened there, the assassination, the earthquake, and the images, frankly, that Americans have seen and so many people have been horrified by. So I think this shows that they're going to have to put more attention into the border question, obviously, generally, which they're doing, but this Haiti question in particular.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't understand Title 42's ins and outs or what the CDC can or shouldn't do, but I do know that a lot of people were critical of the Trump administration's use of Title 42 to expel all migrants and really unravel the asylum process. And I think still using that authority to send people out of the country when we have vaccines and other tools to manage COVID, I think just feels
well, you make a really good point, though, which is that the Trump people were trying to dismantle the asylum process. Obviously, like that was Stephen Miller, their clear objective, and they used this to kind of finish the job. And so that intent should matter. The Trump didn't make some CDC-based determination here. It's like, oh, let me weaponize this thing to do this. And so I think even though there may be a bureaucratic reason or rationale behind it, and the original motivation for the use of Title 42 felt more like a punitive measure to shut the border than it did a public health consideration.
Yeah, it was a little Stephen Miller fucking fantasy. Ben, wild boars are back in the news. So Shakira, the singer, superstar, she was walking in a park in Barcelona with her son when 2 wild boars attacked her, stole her purse, and then ran off with it into the woods. This news was mostly reported by Shakira herself via Instagram, so thank God that Facebook didn't go down that day. But as we know, she does not lie. Her hips also do not lie, so it has to be true. Now, wild hogs are apparently a growing menace in Barcelona. According to the BBC News, Spanish police got nearly 1,200 wild hog-related calls in 2016. And this report also said that, quote, in 2013, one city police officer attempted to take charge of the problem himself and shot at a boar with a service revolver, but missed and hit his partner instead. I feel like that anecdote in this BBC News story raised more questions than it answered for me.
Yeah. Where's the follow-up story?
Where's the follow-up on that guy? But for real, these wild hogs suck. They carry disease. They can live almost anywhere. They eat trash. They're like a true invasive species. They get aggressive. So I don't know. Let's hope they're not gunning for pop stars in the mid-2000s, or else Sean Paul, James Blunt, Natasha Bedingfield, you're on notice. You're next.
So first of all, it's concerning. I like Barcelona. I like people from Barcelona, and I don't want wild boars running over them. Second of all, I'm a big Shakira fan. We actually did an event with Shakira. Do you remember with Obama in Colombia?
Yes.
You were still in government. It was 20...
I was there for that.
Yeah, you were there for that. It was like an education
That was a trip
event.
when we were a little distracted, I think, by the Secret Service guys visiting prostitutes repeatedly in the press hotel.
True.
Yeah,
you were managing that story.
Yeah, that was a real fun fucking trip.
Yeah, you were probably in some press file managing that story. I was like hanging out with Shakira and Obama, making some nice announcements about like education. She's a huge figure in Colombia. The last thing though that to cross these things together. You ever watch Zootopia? I don't know why you would.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it. It's a good movie.
So Shakira's got like a star turn in that. Great song. I forget what kind of animal she is in that, but she was integrated into the animal kingdom in Zootopia.
Huh.
I don't know why that's relevant. In some fashion, it popped in my head. I was trying to think if there were wild boars in Zootopia, because she might have had experience, I'm saying, at least in a voiceover context of dealing with it.
I don't know. It's apparently very impressive. It sounds like I don't know that she fought off the wild boars per se, but it does sound like that she and her son. She had her son with one of the soccer stars who's so famous he only has like one name, like Gerard or something like that.
Yeah.
She asked him to vouch for her bravery in this Instagram story that she posted about the boar incident.
I have no doubt about her bravery. I also want to, just so people know that Tom and I don't do this alone. Our producer, Michael Martinez, just put in the chat, she's a gazelle, I believe, Ben. Which is exactly right. I think she was a gazelle in Zootopia, which a gazelle would want to run away from a wild boar, I would think. Yeah. Man,
somehow we got from Shakira to the Secret Service prostitution scandal in
it's a good segment.
In Colombia.
Yeah,
so my memory of that, by the way, is I learned of that news when I was at a dinner with 9 reporters, and I think it was Julie Pace from the Associated Press was emailing me from across the table with 8 other reporters around us that they had gotten this anonymous tip to one of their tip lines and they were about to report it. So I'm like trying to manage a story with like everyone around me trying to see what I'm typing about. It was not fun.
It was so awful because like it was, of course the U.S. press, and to be fair to them, it's a good story, right? A bunch of Secret Service, you're not going to, but like any hope of getting any coverage of the Summit of the Americas, or the success story of Colombia went out the window, like Obama's doing press conferences standing next to foreign leaders, and all he's being asked about is like, the Secret Service sex, it was a low point for taking American culture on the road there.
Oh yeah, a low point for a whole lot of things.
But a high point for Shakira.
Yeah. Okay, well we're glad she's okay. We're glad she fought off these wild hogs. Thanks to Shakira for her bravery. I don't know what other mid 2000s stars.
Britney. I mean, free
having
Britney.
a renaissance.
Yeah, it's having a renaissance.
Good for her. I'm glad.
I heard. I was doing my PSA listening today, Tommy. I'm going to throw out a celebrity embarrassing experience.
Tell me.
To try to rival you guys, because hearing about Lovett, flubbing George Lucas and Jon embarrassing himself at the Correspondents' Dinner, I can combine those experiences. I was at the Correspondents' Dinner. I'd had a little bit to drink. I mean, that happens sometimes at those things. And I decided that would be a good time to approach Claire Danes and the cast of Homeland and alert them to the fact that I was a national security official, and that to begin to offer them advice on rooms where you cannot use your phones. Because Claire Danes is like always on her phone in like the Situation Room and stuff. Let's just say that like Claire Danes was looking at me like she wished she had like security of her own that could get me as far away from her as possible at that time. And as if that wasn't bad enough, fast forward a few years later, once again, I'm at the Correspondents' Dinner, and there's the cast of The Americans. And I thought that was a great moment to alert them to the fact that I was with Lisa Monaco, who was then our counterterrorism chief, that she was the one who actually rolled up the Russian illegals in the U.S. That was a slightly better reaction. Cool. It was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. We're not really interested in exploring it further, but that's interesting. So I did a little bit better the second time, but both of them, in retrospect, were pretty.
What the fuck? Lisa's like the reason they had that show.
Lisa rolled up the illegals, man. She knew what she was doing. That's crazy. Yeah,
I remember when that story popped. I was like, I'd taken a couple days off to like visit my dad, and I drove him insane. 'Cause, like we were supposed to like be hanging out at the beach, and I was just like back at some apartment the whole time, like dealing with that story. Yeah. It was always around the Correspondents' Dinner when you would, be walking around the office and like Jay-Z was getting a tour of the Situation Room or whatever. But
so people were better than me at like figuring out how to get celebrities tours so that they could meet the celebrities.
I actually remember talking to Obama about Homeland, and I think like everyone was really into it the first couple of seasons. But I remember him specifically making fun of the like Abu Nazir texting and making phone calls from the Situation Room meeting where they're tracking Abu Nazir.
We talked about this like in the Oval Office, like we'd be in like the PDB and there'd be like a distraction about Abu Nazir texting Claire Danes or whatever. And I was just trying to alert the creators and cast of Homeland to this, and not a lot of interest.
What are you going to do?
But I still, great cast. And I love Claire Danes. I just want, for the record, I've loved Claire Danes since my so-called life,
Oh, yeah. Great.
To date myself, I mean, we're all Gen X, late Gen X, whatever we are.
No. Millennials.
Is that what we are?
Yeah. As far as you know. Okay. Ben, enjoy New York. For the listeners at home who made it this far, Ben's in New York. And I'll see you next week.
See you guys.